All right, welcome everyone. I'm Amanda Fuller from the Kentucky Academy of Science. I want to welcome everybody to our very first ever Science Student Advocacy Workshop. This is January 28th. This is session 1 of 2, and great to see everybody here. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to give a quick introduction to who the Kentucky Academy of Science is for folks who don't know who we are. And then I'm going to turn it over to Rob Weber, who is our new staff person who's going to be running the workshop for you all. And we're really excited to have Rob with us. Rob is our new Communications and Policy Director for KAS. So I do see a lot of familiar names here. I know a lot of you are members of the Kentucky Academy of Science. We have about 4,000 members across the state. And so if you heard about this workshop through other channels, that's fantastic. I'm really glad the word did get out around to our student advocates around the state, particularly to our student advocates. The workshop, of course, is open to anyone. But if you aren't a member, you might want to consider finding out more about how to do that. At kyscience.org, you can find out about our membership options. If you're a faculty, staff, or student, or a K-12 teacher anywhere in Kentucky, you can join the Kentucky Academy of Science at no cost to you. We have affiliate members at all of our institutions of higher education. They pay dues to us so that their faculty, staff, and students can join as members. So it's a great benefit for you. I would encourage you to find out more about that and take advantage of it. As a scientific society, we are focused on the state of Kentucky. Our policy work is focused on the state of Kentucky, but we do a lot of other work too. We're more than 100 years old. We help connect scientists to each other through our annual meeting every year, through our research journal. We have public events where we do outreach, trying to improve science literacy through partnerships with the Kentucky Science Center and through public programming like our Bench Talk Live series every month. And you can find all of that at our website at kyscience.org. I want to give a special thank you to our 2 partners who helped us produce this program today. Great big shout out to student colleagues at the University of Kentucky and the University of Louisville. Thankfully for all of you, there are students who already are very involved in advocacy and are going to teach us all about the work that they're doing. So we'll hear from them in part 2 of the series, but I want you all to wave and say hi so people know who you are and recognize the great work that you're doing. At UK, the group that we're partnering with is called Kentucky Advocates for Science Policy and Research. Eleanor Johnson is a leader in that group, and I know there are other people from UK who are involved in that group. So thank you so much for joining us and for getting the word out at the University of Kentucky. I know a lot of you are here. Feel free to wave and identify yourselves. And thank you for being here with us. We're really looking forward to the sharing and learning that we can do with you. The other partner that I want to shout out is the Science Policy and Outreach Group at the University of Louisville. And Megan Zipper is the president. Jacob Miller is a policy coordinator with SPOG. And you all have been doing great work for a number of years promoting science policy work among graduate students, I think other students too at UofL. And we're really excited to be learning more about the work that you're doing. So we'll hear from you all mostly in part 2, but I think we do have an announcement from you today about the thing that you have coming up. So wave hi if you feel like it. Both of you, if you would put your social media handles in our chat as well, I'd love people to follow both of your groups and keep up with what you're doing. So thank you so much for your great work. Thank you for being part of this partnership with the workshop. At this point, I want to turn it over to Rob Weber, Communications and Policy Director, who's going to run the show for us.
All right, thank you, Amanda, and thank you everyone for joining us today. So I am going to speak for the next 22 minutes about sort of giving an introduction to the General Assembly, how to use some of the tools that are available to citizens to stay in touch with what's going on there, and then also give you tips on how to have an impact on the process, how to be effective advocates. Let me share my screen. Okay, everybody have a good view. you say, okay. So you all are much needed at the state capitol, city hall meetings, anywhere where public policy is being made, because public policy becomes remarkably better when scientists are involved in presenting data and priorities and giving the state and localities a good path forward. So appreciate your all's interest in knowing that you have much to contribute, because I can assure you that you do. I worked for the legislature for 24 years. I've seen citizens have an impact, and I know that eloquent, creative minds like scientists can really make great points that need to be considered as legislation is developed. So just to give an overview of the Kentucky General Assembly, the two-way communications between lawmakers and citizens are sort of at the heart of the process. They want the folks back in their home district to know what's happening, what are the issues, and they desperately want feedback from their people about this is how this issue impacts our lives back here in the district, so that they can do the best job representing. Now, in the General Assembly, it's bicameral, just like every state in the nation except one. So there's two chambers, 100 members in the House of Representatives and 38 in the Senate. There are currently Republicans, not just majorities in both chambers, but what we're referring to as super duper majorities, that they have the numbers to pass any legislation they want if they stick together, and they have the numbers to override any veto. So it's sort of a balance of power that we have not seen in recent memory in Kentucky. There is currently one, if you noticed on that past slide, the numbers of Republicans and Democrats in the House don't add up to 100 members. That's simply because there's currently a vacancy in one of the Louisville districts. So legislative sessions are held every year. There are 60-day sessions in even numbered years and 30-day sessions in odd number years. Those sessions always start in January. And there's also the potential for lawmakers to be called back into special legislative sessions at any time, but those can only be called by the governor at this point. Lawmakers are making a move to change that so that they can have a say in calling these special sessions, but that will require voters to approve a constitutional amendment before that might happen. In this year's session, some of the important dates to keep note of are the days when bills can no longer be introduced in the House or Senate. So bills are getting introduced every day, and that's going to continue in the House till February 28th and in the Senate till March 2nd. Once those dates pass, we'll have a fairly comprehensive view of all the issues that are going to be dealt with this year. Now, I say a fairly comprehensive view because there's still a chance for amendments to come up to make significant changes on bills. But for the most part, we know what we're dealing with once those deadlines pass. The veto recess is the period of time where lawmakers take a pause in their chamber activity and return to their home districts and give time for any of the bills they passed right before that veto recess. They allow enough days to elapse to find out whether or not the governor is going to make a timeline to veto or not veto that legislation. Then they come back and have a chance to override that. So the veto recess runs from March 31st till April 13th. After that, lawmakers come back for to close out the session, scheduled for April 14th. About 50% of the time that scheduled final date might get tinkered with a little bit because they're always doing a lot of work at the end. They could push that back one day if they wanted, but only one day because the Constitution says April 15th has to be the final day of the latest possible final day of a session. So even though when we consider the work of the General Assembly, sort of the first thing that comes to mind are the chambers in the House and Senate where there's a good deal of activity, but really the less glamorous side of the legislature, the committee system, that's the workhorse of the legislature. And that's where bills get more extensive airings, there's more discussion, there's more opportunities for questions, there's more opportunity for citizen input. So the committee meetings are really where a lot is happening. And I put an arrow next to the committees that at this time of year, you particularly want to pay attention to. The standing committees are the committees in the Senate and the House where legislation actually goes to be considered and advanced. So of all these committees listed here, it is the standing committees where that's where the legislative process is, most is occurring there. I've got to try to escape from this PowerPoint for a moment to admit one more person to the room. Let me do this real quick.
Or Rob, if you want to make me a co-host, I might be able to let people in too.
My concern there is whether that would affect the poll at the end. Do you? We'll play it by ear. If there's more people coming in, maybe we'll do that. Okay.
Some of our speakers are not here yet, so we need to let them in.
Okay, I'm keeping an eye on that then. So right now we're 18 days into this session, and where we stand currently is there have been a total of 516 bills introduced in the House and Senate. 8 have already passed into law. Several of those deal with redistricting. Then there's also a bill about disaster recovery relief, and another one granting virtual school days to school districts. But 8 bills having passed already, that's sort of a quicker start than usual. Things typically start off slow and ramp up into a frenzy in the latter days of the session. So how this compares with last year, just so you get a sense of how a session looks in its entirety. Last year, there were 880 bills introduced, 200 of those became law. So about almost 23% of bills typically become law. The vast majority don't make it. They move a little or maybe even a lot through the system, but they don't make it over that final finish line. And when the session comes to the close, they are dead. And if they ever come back again, they need to be reintroduced and start back at square one. So the vast majority of bills do not become law. This year's session is considered a long one at 60 days, and it features the #1 constitutional responsibility that's given to lawmakers, and that is passing a state budget. They pass budgets, plans over the course of 2 years. So it's a biennial budget. And this year's budget process is off to a quick start because normally in January, the governor presents a budget proposal and that's when the process starts. This year, it was a little different in that the majority party in the House introduced their own budget even before the governor's proposal came. So that was sort of an unprecedented move. And then they started moving it through their chamber in unprecedented speed. So it's now in the Senate, which says they're going to slow down a bit on it and take some time to dig into it and digest. But it is off to an unusually quick start this year. So the legislative process, it's known as a deliberative process. There are speed bumps built into it, so things typically don't happen too fast. And I say typically because unusual things crop up in every session. But for the most part, things move slowly. There are many hurdles for bills to pass in order to become law. There are lots of opportunities at every step in the way for people to have an impact. So I'm not going to go through the entire diagram of how a bill becomes law, but just to give you the short version of it, a bill can be introduced in either the House or the Senate, and whichever chamber it starts in, it's going to get referred to a committee in that chamber. Maybe it'll never come up for a vote there, and that's the end of it. But if it does get a favorable vote in committee, then it goes to the full chamber where it originated for all members to vote on. Then it goes to the other chamber, and that process repeats itself with committee consideration. And if it makes it past that full chamber will consider the bill. if it gets amended or changed from one chamber to the next, then they need to come together at the end and agree on a version that they're both happy with. If that doesn't happen, that's one more way for a bill to die. But for budget bills in particular, that always happens. There's always a conference committee in the final days of the session where they're trying to iron out their differences on their spending plans. So I want to go through some of the main ways that you can stay connected to the legislative process and offer input. And really, it all starts with a pretty wonderful website for the General Assembly. It's at legislature.ky.gov. Obviously, you can just Google Kentucky General Assembly and you'll land there. But this is the welcome page, and it's laid out fairly cleanly. And once you get used to it, you find a wealth of resources there. And I want to mention that the whole thing is mobile friendly. All the pages are scalable for mobile use. So really, no matter where you are in the world, if you have a connection on your phone, you have ways to know exactly what's going on in the General Assembly and how you can weigh in and give your input. So even though there's an overwhelming amount of resources on that website, I'm going to go through sort of the main 4 things that anyone beginning in advocacy will want to be familiar with. And I think we'll take a deeper dive into more things in our second workshop in February. But 4 things that people who want to influence the process might start their day with begins with looking at the daily schedule so you know what's happening in the chambers and the committee system. Being aware of the fact that there are live streams, anything that's happening in the General Assembly, there is a live stream available to you so you can see it. Lawmaker contact info is obviously available on the webpage, and extensive info on bills through a document known as the legislative record. So just to show you how to navigate to these things from the main web page, I marked right up here an arrow's pointing to the legislators tab. That's where you're going to find the contact info on legislators. If you navigate through that a bit, you might see a page like this for a legislator that offers much helpful information, such as their bio, contact information, what committees they serve on. And particularly helpful is their Twitter handles are listed there. And I am amazed at how much good information you can get about the General Assembly that you can't get anywhere else than seeing what lawmakers are saying on their Twitter feeds. So the next of the 4 big items to be aware of on the General Assembly homepage is the legislative record. And you click on the bills tab up on top to get that so that you can see bill summaries, the entire text of the bills, who's sponsoring it, where it stands in the process, how to zero in on the subjects that interest you. And this is another one of the items that we're going to dig deeper into in February. The next of the big 4 things to be aware of is the daily schedule. The arrow down at the bottom points to the legislative calendar. So if you clicked on today's legislative calendar, you'd see it's a pretty light day. The only things on the calendar is that the House and Senate both convened at 9 a.m. Fridays tend to be the light days of the lawmakers' work weeks. If you were to look at this on a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, it would be a much longer list filled with all sorts of committee meetings. The final thing I want to mention on the General Assembly homepage are the live streams that allow you to see anything that's happening, whether it's in chamber proceedings or committee meetings. I've got the arrow pointing down here because you actually have to scroll down a little bit to see a button that says live streams. If you click it, you have options. You can either see live streams provided by Kentucky Educational Television or live streams provided by the lawmakers' staff, the Legislative Research Commission. KET sort of has higher quality cameras, but they don't cover everything except for all chamber proceedings. On the other hand, the LRC's cameras are not as high res, but the LRC will guarantee that they will be covering every single committee meeting. So you know that you can find what you're looking for there. These toll-free numbers are helpful not only for you to be able to contact legislators, but if you want to have a campaign and tell other people, hey, weigh in on this topic that we're all interested in, these numbers are important to do it. So the one up top is the one that gets the most attention, the legislative message line. If you call that, you'll have a friendly person on the other end who will precisely take down any message that you want delivered to a lawmaker. You could say, I want this given to my lawmakers in my home district. And if you know who they are, great. If you don't know, they'll help you figure that out. You could say, I want this message to go to every person on the Judiciary Committee, and that will happen too. So it's really, they're customer friendly. You tell them what you want and they're going to make that happen for you. Now, perhaps you don't want to leave a message. Perhaps you actually want to get a lawmaker on the line. Down at the bottom of this list, you see the number to call lawmakers. And I see now I need to offer a correction on that area code. The area code is 502. So the number to call lawmakers is 502-564-8100. You can ask to be transferred directly to their offices. These other numbers here are numbers for people to offer messages if they have hearing impairments. There's a Spanish speaking message line. And right in the middle is the bill status line. So if you're interested in a piece of legislation, but you're not sure where it is in the process, call that bill status line, give them the best description you can of the bill, and they're going to look it up and provide you with the information you're seeking. So our Capitol building, it's the people's building. It's open to everybody. Even though there were pandemic restrictions, it's widely open now. Citizens can attend committee meetings. They can go to the galleries and the House and Senate chambers. The House and Senate are up on the 3rd floor of the Capitol. So if you go to head to either chamber, you're going to be directed to exactly where you can get a gallery pass, and you'll be able to get a seat in the chambers to observe proceedings. So when you're working with legislators, you're going to want to strategize on what are the best points to intervene and who should you know. The simple question of the best point to intervene is right now or right away, because things can move quick otherwise. We've certainly seen that this session. But you also want to be aware if a bill's getting ready to come up for consideration in a certain committee, then you want to know these are the specific committee members I want to talk to. If a bill has just been delivered from one chamber to another, you might think, I want to talk with the legislative leaders who are going to decide where this bill goes next, which committee. You might want to weigh in on them that, yes, this is an important topic. We do want you to send it somewhere where it's going to keep its momentum and keep moving. So when you're working with legislators, obviously it's important to know the full facts of your issue, not just your argument for it, but it's also good to know the other side's arguments on the other side of an issue so that you can really have a complete view of the matter and answer any questions that come up. The bottom point here is really one of the more important ones to stress, humanizing the issue. It's always good to bring logic to bear when trying to convince someone to support something that's important to you. But really, even more powerful than that in moving legislators is if you can give a concrete, specific story or example of this is how this issue impacts someone in your district. That's what they're really going to respond to. It's always good if you can involve the media anytime that you're trying to have an impact. If you can write letters to the editors, you can simply call a reporter and say, this is something that's important to me, and they might decide I better follow up on this and write a story about it. And it's good if you can become a trusted info source for lawmakers. If they ask you a question about an issue that you're discussing and you don't know the answer, that's perfectly fine. It happens every day in the legislature. where the proper response is, I don't know, but I'll find out and get back to you. That's always appreciated. Lawmakers' time is extremely limited, so it's good to keep your meetings or phone conversations as short as possible. That also helps give your message more punch if you're delivering it succinctly. And it's good anytime you meet with the legislator. It's good if you can leave something behind as a reminder of your meeting. And this is actually a point that we're going to go back to in our next meeting, where one of our student collaborators, Eleanor Johnson, is going to talk about the importance of writing compelling one-pagers. That's one of the things to leave behind for legislators, so they can really have something to keep their mind on an issue. In my final minute here, I'm just going to offer a few don'ts, and that includes not being pushy or threatening to lawmakers or burning bridges. Lawmakers are going to consider close to 1,000 issues in each session. And if they got mad and stopped working with anyone who doesn't vote with them the same way on every issue, they'd have no one left to talk to. So there's a culture in the legislature where people can have differences and turn around the next day and work together. So be aware of that and try to have that attitude yourself. And the biggest don't of all to keep in mind is don't underestimate your power to influence, because it happens in every session on key issues. Lawmakers do want to serve the people who have the ultimate power over them to either vote them back into office or vote them out. So you all do have a voice. You do have an ability to make an impact, and don't ever underestimate that, please. I'll mention a great resource. The General Assembly staff is known as the Legislative Research Commission. If you ever have any question at all, is there a bill dealing with this topic? Where does it stand? How do I contact someone? If you call this number at the bottom, you will have a pleasantly reaffirming experience with your government, in that you will have someone on the line who's going to try to help you. They might have to transfer your call a couple times. That's not passing the buck. That's zeroing in on getting you to the right person. So that's a great resource to have. And now we get to move on to a wonderful portion of our meeting.
Could we do one thing before we turn it over to our panel?
Absolutely.
I would love to get a photo of folks who are participating today. This is our very first workshop that we've done of these, and we're very excited about it. And I would love if folks wanted to turn their cameras on for a minute. I would love to get a screenshot photo of everybody, if you don't mind. It's a very exciting milestone for us to be here with you today. Yay. Okay, so let me do a couple of these. We're on two screens here. So let me see if I can do this. Is everybody on a screen? No. Okay. So that's okay. If you don't have a webcam, that's all right. Appreciate everybody who's here with your mask on or you're not, doesn't matter. Hang on. Okay, ready? Everybody say policy.
Policy.
And then we'll do one more. Again, everybody, policy.
Policy.
Thank you.
Okay, ready to go on?
Wait, hang on.
Yeah, okay.
Let me do another one. I think I missed one. Okay, one more time. Camera's back on just for 1 second. Thank you all. Ready, policy.
Policy.
Great, gotcha. Okay, carry on.
All right. So we have an illustrious panel to talk about some of the issues that are of importance to the science community. Our past president of the Kentucky Academy of Science, Trent Garrison, is going to sort of organize and moderate this panel. So I'm going to turn things over to him. But just to tell you more about Trent, he is the chair of our group's Education and Advocacy Committee. He is on the Executive Council of Kentuckians for Science Education. He is an assistant professor of geology and a former director of environmental affairs for the energy and environment area in state government. So welcome, Trent.
Well, thank you very much. It's good to see everybody here. It's such a good group, and we're obviously very happy to have Rob with us. He's very knowledgeable in the area of policy, given his career in LRC. So very fortunate to have him here. We're also very fortunate to have our panelists. And let me just, I'll just jump right in, and I'm going to introduce Kara Stewart first. We're going to have Kara Stewart, Randy Strobo, and Tom Fitzgerald. But Kara Stewart's going to be our first panelist. And just a little bit about her. She is the Director of Policy Advocacy at the Kentucky Voices for Health. She's been involved in legal aid of the Bluegrass, Kentucky Equal Justice Center. She's been a former chief of staff and much more. And just personally, I know Kara, and she's a hard worker, and she's done many good things for the Commonwealth. So welcome to you. And what we're going to do is we're going to give all the panelists, 5 or 7 minutes. It's a little bit relaxed, but something like that to talk about some of the top bills, or just groups of bills that they're watching this legislative session. And after that, we'll have time for some audience participation. So Kara, if you want to take it away.
Hi, yeah, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time, but because at first I was like, Trent, I don't follow science bills. What do people want to see or know about this? Like, I look about, making sure that all Kentuckians can thrive in sort of a public benefits way. So I follow, healthcare, of course, and Medicaid a lot, very specifically. And then a few others. and of course, there is sort of the bigger picture, the science that goes into all of that. And of course, also healthcare is science, I guess. So that matters too. Is there anyone here that has any particular interest in any, I kind of want to know, I don't want to waste your time and tell you about bills that you don't really care about. And I don't have a great feel for who's here and what you want to know about. Because like Rob said, headphones out there.
We lost your audio.
When you took your headphones out, we lost your audio.
Headphones off and it didn't disconnect or something.
You're back now.
Okay, good. I was like, why are people turning green? They're turning green because something is wrong. That was something wrong. All right. Well, I was saying I didn't want to waste your time, which I just did. So I apologize. What I was saying was I don't want to waste your time and tell you about bills that you don't really have a big interest in. And I wasn't sure exactly who all was here and what you might want to know more about. And of course, like Rob said, there are like 1,000 bills filed every session. And an important thing to know about that is there's at least 1 million ways to kill a bill and only one way to become law. So for a bill to make it all the way through is very difficult. And a lot of times folks can get real caught up on bills that aren't going nowhere. And so I mostly just ignore those. Like if I know from the jump, like we're to this point, some of this is rumor mill, but some of it's like, okay, it only has Democratic sponsors. And, I think Trent carefully mentioned that I was the chief of staff. I was the chief of staff for the House Democrats. So I know what that means. It means it's not going anywhere unless it's a very unique situation. So those bills, there's some really great ones out there, but they're not something that I'm focused on this session. I'm focused on bills that have been assigned to committee, that have the attention of committee chairs already, and bills that you sort of know that months before the session starts, because you've already been working that bill. And anytime, like a bill, for example, let's see, and my laptop is dead, so my cheat sheet that I thought I was going to have in front of me, I don't have. But House Bill 219, y'all might care about it because it includes research. And again, I'm not sure exactly what kind of research you're doing, but House Bill 19 is to take what we did with colon cancer in Kentucky. So Kentucky, we have a lot of distinctions in healthcare, like We fight back and forth with West Virginia about who smokes the most. But here in Northern Kentucky, we're always the leaders. We always have the most smokers. How weird is that? It's, we top the national by quite a bit, unfortunately. And no surprise, smoking is the #1 cause of lung cancer. So we have the highest rates of lung cancer. We also have the highest rates of death from lung cancer. Now this year or last year, we moved from #1 to #2 because we implemented some new earlier detection, thanks to some scientists in Kentucky who figured out a new way to do an earlier detection mouth swab kind of magic stuff. I have a terrible tendency of really great science I call magical, and I realize that it is not. It is science, and someone has done lots of work to figure that out and make it happen. But when it seems that good, you're like, wow. And that is the way some of this early detection lung cancer stuff has been. But we're doing still a pretty terrible job of doing lung cancer screening for folks that need it. And so it becomes like a fatalism. And then folks, when you don't really get pain from lung cancer, but when they get another symptom, by that point, it is often like death. So, there's this sort of culture of fatalism around it, and not doing what we can to give people the quality of life that they are entitled to, and or the survival that they really should be entitled to. So doctors really started pushing for this, and this was like a year in the works to create a lung cancer screening project. And it is a bipartisan prevention program with the Department of Public Health. That is exciting. And that has right now, it's moving. So it's passed out of the House committee. It has been assigned to a Senate committee. Y'all, that's big moves. Like I celebrate sometimes when a bill gets assigned to a committee, even if it's never heard or it's only heard for consideration. So that may not sound like a ton, but it's a big move. And so this is kind of my focus for you all today in terms of your engagement. And also, in case you aren't doing this already, I make a general ask of anybody who gets trapped in a Zoom with me that, you every week, you make 5 calls, find something that you care about and call your state rep, your state senator, your US rep, and your US senators, because it's pretty easy and quick. And I do it in about 5 minutes every Monday morning. I just have it on my calendar. I make my quick calls. There's usually friendly people on their line. I call local numbers for the DC folks, because I have built, you can build relationships in a couple of weeks with the people in those offices, and then they will call you back because they're humans who work in Kentucky, so it just doesn't take much to get a relationship started there. And they just don't get that many calls. They get a whole bunch of calls on certain days and certain times. But like if everyone in this Zoom reached out right now to Chair Ralph Alvarado, who is a doctor of Senate Health and Welfare, and said, hey, we really want to see this lung cancer screening be heard in your committee, that would have a big impact, because 10 calls about one issue in the same day. I know there's other folks on here. I know that Tom Fitzgerald and Rob both would agree. That gets people's attention in that annex. That's enough to get attention. So just lest you were thinking like, I need to go out and be a grassroots organizer to ever have anybody pay attention to something, that's not the case. And it's worth your time. Now, are you going to change? Let's see. And also I want to throw back on something Rob said about just because you disagree on something, you might agree on something else. Every day of my life, I remind myself, no permanent enemies, no permanent allies, only aligned interests. Because me and Senator Meredith, buddy, we get some good stuff done. Like he is working right now on creating, I think, a stronger structure for oversight for our Cabinet for Health and Family Services in a meaningful way. He also does some things that allow and in fact encourage discrimination in healthcare that I think are awful. Truly, he championed a bill to allow front desk workers and anybody involved to discriminate against people trying to seek healthcare. But at the same time, I work with him to try to improve our delivery of Medicaid, and he is my #1 delivery of Medicaid champion. And that is just the way lawmaking works. So that bill I'd also uplift as a science bill from Senator Meredith. It doesn't really matter. I think just the lung cancer screening is enough for y'all to know in terms of blending research with practice. and for what's actually moving this session in terms of science and healthcare. The rest of it is a little too wheezy for now, as far as I know. But you can feel free. I didn't make a slide and put my name and number out there, but I'm happy to share my information. I'll share it in the chat with anybody. If you want to grab me, you can. So move ahead there, Trent. Tell me if there's anything for whatever.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kara. I know you have a lot going on. I know everybody else does too. So we really appreciate you being here, your time, and that's exactly what we're looking for. Something that we've struggled in KES with on this committee is having someone in the healthcare field with a healthcare voice. So any of this stuff is very helpful to us. So thank you for your time.
Well, I think I will add one other thing, that there isn't researchers and those kinds of scientists are the least represented. So, doctors, they got a great lobby, and other kinds of providers also have pretty good lobbies. And it's like a full-time thing. You can't really keep up with it on your own for all of it. And you have to have people in the room listening. And I'm not there in person because COVID, but other people are. I went to testify last week or the week before, and I was shocked that it was business as usual in the Capitol, and that the cafeteria was completely packed, like every seat taken, but there was not a single member of the public there. Like, I recognized everyone in the cafeteria, and there were way more legislators in the cafeteria than normal during the session. Because I think everyone in the cafeteria had everyone else's cell phone numbers already, so they weren't actually having to face anyone. So it's just like contract lobbyists are all there like normal. And I only saw 2 other sort of mission-driven lobbyists there, most of whom are not there because COVID. So just also FYI, there's that happening that I feel terrified about. And I really, if anybody wants to come up with a solution for that, like, it feels dangerously anti-democratic to me right now. And so just FYI, that's happening out there.
Well, it sounds like our voices are as important now as ever, if not more so.
More, for sure, yeah. More, because there's just so, because there's KFTC is not there because COVID. None of the grassroots groups are there. The public is literally not there. I'm assuming in part because COVID, but also because of the new restrictions for when you show up at the door now, they're asking you where you're going and why. And there's sort of a new layer there that prevents sort of that engagement, which is in theory for COVID safety. But yes, your voices are more important for sure. Just throwing that out there.
Well, thanks for that. And thanks for being here. That's very important information that we need to know. Well, if you don't mind sticking around, we're gonna move on to Randy and then Fitz here in a little bit, and we're gonna give our audience the opportunity to ask some questions. I'm sure there will be plenty of those. So let me just jump right in. Thank you very much, and jump right into Randy, who is back for the 2nd year. We appreciate you being here last year. Randy is a partner at Strobo Barkley. He serves as a consultant for the Kentucky Conservation Committee, and the KCC is a group that I've worked with quite a bit in the past, and they have a really good bill tracking system on their website, and they keep it pretty up to date. Lane Boldman, she couldn't be here today, but she's also involved in that organization. I know they do lots of great work. And Randy's also an adjunct professor of environmental law at Bellarmine. So welcome, Randy. Take it away.
Thanks, Trent. And thanks, Amanda and Rob, for inviting me here. So Fitz and I overlap a lot. So Fitz, I'm going to leave you a lot of the bills that I know you're working pretty closely on. But I'm also, I think Rob had asked us to talk a little bit about some federal law. So there's a couple federal laws that I'm going to mention, mainly having to do with money, which is always fun. But yeah, I've been teaching at Bellarmine now for about 10 years. And I see a couple students that I've had. I see Dang there and a couple others that are watching today, and it's great. So thanks to all the students that really care about these issues. They really need more student voices and more academic voices in general at in Frankfurt. And it's great to see that everybody's interested in these issues. So like Trent said, I help the Kentucky Conservation Committee as opposed to the Kentucky Resources Committee, which Fitz is the current director of, well, emeritus director, I think. I'll let Fitz clear that up later. But we generally work hand in hand with KRC. Fitz has been doing this much longer than I have. But KCC's board is a pretty great board. It's a board full of academics, former state agency workers, just general citizens from across the state. And what they do is they kind of vote on these bills that we present, Lane and I present to them, and talk about, and they take positions on the bills based on those votes. And that kind of dictates the work that Lane and I do in Frankfurt as far as what we're lobbying for most aggressively, either in support of a bill or in opposition to a bill. And there's lots of bills this session, again, with the environment, having to do with the environment. And because the environment a lot of times is dependent on some science-based information, there's a lot of sciencey bills too, which is always fun. But I'm gonna mention a few in the House and a few in the Senate, and then I'll head on over to some federal laws that we've been working on. So I can share a screen. I think you have given me the ability to do that. Is that okay? Okay. I see Amanda shaking her head. Let me see. It's letting me do it. Actually, it's not. That's probably my fault on my end. That's okay. I don't need it. But a bill that is always filed, and it has been for probably the past 5 or 6 years by Representative Marzian out of Louisville, is the plastics bill. And this year that's HB 189. And that's a bill that would limit single-use plastics and putting those plastics into the state. It's a bill that never, I don't think, has gotten a hearing and probably won't get a hearing anytime soon. But there are a few other plastics bills, and I'm hoping Fitz will talk about advanced recycling when he's on, because I know he's done a lot of work with that. But plastics, are still a big issue everywhere around the world, including Kentucky. Unfortunately, in Kentucky, we don't do much about it. There are legislators that try to do something about getting plastics out of our state and reducing the amount of plastics that are produced, and trying to promote the reuse of plastics when possible. But unfortunately, these bills don't really go far. Another bill that, and on its face, doesn't really look like it's related to science, but I think it's very, very important to science. That's House Bill 222. And that's a bill that we call an anti-SLAPP bill. And a SLAPP is it's an acronym for a strategic lawsuit against public participation. And what that means is when somebody like a scientist or a student or anybody who communicates with their government or protests to their government to oppose or support something that another entity wants, like a permit approval, for example, under the Clean Water Act or the Clean Air Act, sometimes those entities that want that approval and sometimes don't get that approval because of that protest will sue the people who were protesting. And that has a pretty detrimental effect on people's ability to protest their government. And what this bill does is it makes it harder to bring those lawsuits. So Fitz and I are actually dealing with one of these lawsuits in Western Kentucky right now, where our clients who had protested the issuance of a Kentucky no discharge operating permit, which is basically a permit for a industrial, pig facility, a CAFO in Western Kentucky. They managed to have that permit revoked or help to revoke that permit. And now the owners of that farm or that facility are now suing our clients directly for defamation. So this bill would help prevent that from happening. So not directly related to science, but certainly something that you all should be concerned about as folks who would want to protest and advocate for yourselves or for your clients in Frankfurt. Another bill, this one again is House Bill 338, again filed by Representative Kulkarni. Representative Kulkarni filed the anti-SLAPP bill as well. House Bill 338 is the PFAS bill. And I think Trent, we talked about this similar bill last time.
We did.
Most of you all know about PFAS. It's basically what we call forever pollutant, forever chemical, because once it's produced, it's very hard to get rid of, and it's found basically everywhere. Our state environmental cabinet actually conducted a study earlier this year. It basically found PFAS everywhere. The levels weren't as bad as I think some people thought they would be, but there's still elevated levels in certain areas throughout the state. There's a particular case right now in the Henderson County area with a specific facility that's been discharging PFAS in the air and in groundwater for some time, and they're just now realizing and trying to figure out the impacts of it all. But this bill would essentially require the cabinet to pass Clean Water Act and Safe Drinking Water Act limitations on PFAS. Let's see. I'm going to switch over to the Senate really quickly. Senate Bill 52. And Senate Bill 52 kind of has a companion bill, Senate Bill 69. I'm sure Fitz will probably have a few things to say about these. But again, on their face, not really, you don't see a direct relation to science, except if you kind of dig in a little bit. But Senate Bill 52 is a bill filed by Senator Hornback, which charges a fee when you convert agricultural to something that's non-agricultural. And that fee is $100 per acre. And that fee will go into what's called the Agricultural Enhancement Fund, which is basically the PACE fund. And I don't know if you all know that term, but basically when you want to put or you want to preserve farmland and as so where the science comes in though, I think, is what this bill originally was. But one of the country is finding ways to have a big solar development on land so that it can coexist with another use. In this case, agriculture. So there are different ways that you can do it, and it's really being studied out west a little bit more, where they're more in need of dealing with water issues, and they're finding that solar developments can help with the growing of crops, not needing as much water as they originally would because of transpiration issues and also temperature issues. In Kentucky, we don't have that much of a problem with that as compared to the West. But one thing that science could help with is figuring out how these two uses can coexist going forward. And I think that that being agricultural uses with solar developments. Solar developments on farmland are typically ground mounted. So the solar panels are sitting directly on the ground. But a lot of academics and a lot of researchers are finding ways to raise those solar panels and calling them basically agrivoltaics, so that it gives a little bit more room and a little more ease for crops to grow underneath. So another interesting bill that kind of has a science edge to it that I think, and hopefully a lot of you will take an interest in, because that research is needed in Kentucky. The last kind of group of Senate bills I'll talk about are the crypto bills. So one senator in particular, Senator Smith in Eastern Kentucky, has been filing bills to kind of legitimize blockchain technology and Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies in Kentucky. And at first, again, doesn't sound like a sciencey type bill, but the main concern that KCC has with blockchain and cryptocurrency is how energy intensive it is to produce them and to do Bitcoin mining. Some of these facilities use as much electricity as a small city. And so while KCC has taken a position on these bills to oppose them, mainly because not much work has been done, especially in Kentucky, on really figuring out the energy issue associated with these things. So there's definitely ways they can be more efficient, and also possibly tying Bitcoin mining, cryptocurrency mining to renewable energy rather than existing coal-fired power plants. Fossil fuel energy is something that KCC is interested in, and another great topic for folks to research. With that, I'm going to switch over to federal bills really quickly. So federal legislation in the environmental world doesn't happen on a major level very often at all. And I think probably, and Fitz can correct me, the last really big kind of change to federal laws that have to do with the environment probably occurred during the Clinton administration with the Safe Drinking Water Act. But besides that, really not too much on the legislative side. Now on the regulatory side, where regulations are promulgated by federal agencies, things are happening all the time. Those things can be crazy, and it also can be dependent on who's in the administration. And there's always a back and forth, and that's really interesting and also annoying to follow. But on the federal legislative level, not so much, except when it comes to money and funding. So most of you have probably heard of the infrastructure bill that was recently passed by the Senate and the House and signed by the president. So the infrastructure bill is really interesting when it comes to conservation, because there's billions of dollars in that bill dedicated towards conservation. A couple of those issues that are directly related to folks in Kentucky, and I think could be related to research that a lot of folks can do here in Kentucky, are the billions of dollars. Well, I think $350 million has been allocated to the preservation and conservation of wildlife corridors. That's a huge issue across the United States, across the world really, but across the United States and in Kentucky. And it makes that money available to transportation cabinets, but also to nonprofits, to local governments, and to folks working with governments to raise money to study the issue and also implement new infrastructure that helps with wildlife corridors. So one thing that KCC has been doing is working directly with the transportation cabinet to ensure, one, that they know that the funding is there, because oftentimes a lot of things get lost, and two, hoping that they're set up to receive that money and to work with other groups to help get that federal funding in Kentucky. And three, to possibly do some pilot projects to see how it could work in Kentucky. So we've been having those meetings, but mainly we want the state government to know this money's ready, it's available, how can we make it happen here? The same thing with a few other issues. There's some pollinators. There's emphasis on roadway pollinators in that bill. There's an emphasis on getting rid of invasives in the bill and promoting native plants, primarily on roadways and on federal lands. There's about $5 billion in the bill dedicated to dealing with orphaned gas wells, which is a huge problem in Kentucky, and something I know Fitz can talk about quite a bit. And about $11 billion dedicated towards dealing with abandoned mine lands. So a lot of opportunity there that regular folks, not just governments, but regular folks can take advantage of in trying to fund some of their projects. You all probably have heard of the Build Back Better bill as well, which was kind of the corollary bill, I guess, with the infrastructure bill. There was a lot of other funding, great funding for conservation in that as well. But unfortunately, that bill pretty much is not going to happen, at least in the current form. And there's rumors that they may come back in a less in a smaller way. But for now, that bill's done. There are several other ways to that the federal government has made money available for science-related, conservation-related projects. But the infrastructure bill is pretty great when it comes to finding that kind of funding. It's not really kind of, I guess, the NSF funding and things like that. It's not really directly related to that at all. These are different funding mechanisms by which we can all take advantage of. But the other problem with the infrastructure bill, though, is that it also promotes all kinds of infrastructure. So we'll see a lot more road building, which can have pretty detrimental impacts depending on how they're planned, and other type of infrastructure that may cause environmental harm going forward. But for the most part, I think it's a bill that we all should know about and we all should take advantage of. So with that, I'll stop. Oh, yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I'll stop and I'll turn it over to you and Fitz.
Thank you very much, Randy. Thank you for coming back a second year. We very much appreciate that, and I've enjoyed your reactions, Kara, to what Randy was saying, your emoji reaction. So I appreciate that as well. Okay, so if Randy, if you're able to hang around, Tom's going to come on for maybe 10 minutes or so, and then we'll have a little bit of a roundtable. Running a little bit behind, so we'll try to catch up here. But let me just introduce Fitz, as he is called. He is the former director of the Kentucky Resources Council from 1984 until last year. And correct me if I'm wrong on any of this stuff. He's now KRC senior staff attorney. He's published many articles, written many policy briefs, and has testified probably more times than anybody I know. And this led to Tom Loftus in the recent Courier Journal article saying, quote, like a one-man army for the environmental movement in Frankfurt for the past 40 years. So he's done a tremendous amount in his professional career at this point. He's also the adjunct professor of energy and environmental law at UofL. So without further ado, let me hand it over to Tom Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Trent. Appreciate that. Listen, in the interest of time, because we are running late, I am not going to go through the all of the details of the various bills that are out there. Let me instead underscore something that Kara mentioned to you all. It has never been easier for a member of the public who is concerned or interested in legislative matters to be part of the process. The General Assembly, just finished day 18 of a 60-day session. You can go to lrc.ky.gov, which is the website for the Legislative Research Commission. The commission is the permanent staff of the legislature and also is managed by the leadership, both in the majority and minority parties of the House and Senate. So when somebody says the LRC, they're generally referring to the staff, but it is the partisan leadership of the staff, other than staff that are staff of the various legislators, are nonpartisan. And they serve the committees, they serve the legislators, they do the drafting of the bills, they staff the committees, and help make the process, for better or for worse, run. And I would encourage you all, if you have a chance and want to do something that is a little bit non-traditional in terms of school, is to contact your legislator, or also contact the LRC and talk to your professors and see whether you can set up externships so that you can go and you can staff and assist one or more of the committees. There are a number of committees of jurisdiction that touch on matters of science and education, natural resources, and it is a fascinating process. Those of us who have been there longer than we care to admit recognize that public policy is not a pretty thing, but it is a process that is important. And as Kara mentioned, I don't know anybody in their right mind who thinks that they can contact either of our current senators in Washington or most of the members of the House and really have any sort of impact on what their decision-making process is going to be. But 10 calls, 10 letters from constituents on a particular bill or issue do get the attention of folks in Frankfurt who are there while we like to tend to vilify those who don't agree with us on matters of policy or politics. The folks that are there, I once said to former chairman of one of the House committees, Mike Cherry, I said, I think 99% of the people that are here for the right reasons, because in their own mind and with their own view of the world, they think they're there to do the right thing. And he said, well, I think you're being generous, although he just said that because I think he was having a bad day. But I think it really is 99% of the people. And so you need to understand that they have a different view. If you've ever read The Sound and the Fury by Faulkner, you understand that the same set of facts can mean very different things to very different people, let alone the creating of facts that or the ignoring of facts that don't get in the way of a good story. But let me just encourage you. There is a mechanism called Bill Watch, and you can actually put in there the topics that you're interested in. If you go to the LRC website, you click on bills, then you click on 2022 regular session, then it will list it has a daily update on what has happened. And then as you go through these layers, you click on House bills, and it has all the House bills by number. You click on a particular bill, it'll bring up the text of the summary of the bill, the sponsor, and where the bill is in the process. And basically, bills go to the Committee on Committees in the House and the Senate. Then they get assigned to a substantive committee. then then that committee will hear the bill. Many of the bills do not get heard, but those that do get heard will either be sent to the floor with no recommendation, or they'll be defeated in committee, or they'll be sent with a recommendation that they should pass. Many of those bills will be amended in committee. Many of those amendments may be folded into what's called a committee substitute, but the process is a stepwise process where these bills will go through the chamber that they're introduced in. They'll then go to the floor. They'll then potentially go to the other chamber, go through the committee process. If there are differences in the bills, they go to a committee that meets and tries to iron out those differences. So it's a fascinating process, and you can track every single bit of it. This bill watch mechanism actually allows you to have updates sent to you every day on whether the bill has moved and what's going on with it. KCC, which is an ally of many years, which Randy is consultant to, does a good bill tracking mechanism. We at the Resources Council, which is kyrc.org, also do bill tracking. We track a number of bills for general interests, which are justice and government bills that are not necessarily environmental or natural resources bills. And we update every Friday. We also have a mailing list that we send a MailChimp copy of the legislative update. So if you're interested in that, contact the KCC and get on their mailing list. Contact us at Fitz at kyrc.org, and we'll be happy to add you to our list. There are a number of bills of interest. One of the most recent, and in terms of before I get into any of the bills, and I'm only going to spend a minute or two talking about them. One of the things that Trent has really brought to the Kentucky Academy of Sciences, which I hope that you will recognize the significance of, is that so much of the public policy decisions that are being made that affect our environment. Okay, when you talk about public health, and Kara's talking about public health, so much of our health has to do with the air, the land, and the water resources that surround us, that we utilize, that are building blocks of a healthy life as well as a healthy economy. And so much of the time, we are using the commons, the public air, the public lands, and the public water as a place to get rid of our wastes, whether it be government waste, whether it be institutional waste, whether it be commercial, residential waste, whether it be industrial manufacturing waste. And we know precious little about a lot of what is being released into the environment. And unfortunately, when matters of public policy are being debated over where we should draw the line between individual responsibility and freedom and pollution and pollution control, so much of those questions are not being animated by the science, right? They are being animated by short-term interests, and they are being animated by economic concerns and by a powerful myth that permeates Kentucky law, which is that economic development and environmental quality cannot coexist peacefully. It is a powerful myth that animates so much of our policy, because when the federal government, when Congress stepped in the 70s, which is the environmental decade, as Randy mentioned, for national legislation, they stepped in and said, states, we are not going to allow you to compete, to run to the bottom on environmental protection as an economic development tool. We're going to set national floor standards for air pollution, water pollution, groundwater pollution, mining regulation. And you can go stronger than those standards, but you can't go below them. Well, Kentucky turned that opportunity to go higher into a ceiling. And so while we have sought the delegation of these various regulatory programs, and we have turned the federal minimum standards into state maximum standards and said you can be no more stringent, no more protective than the minimum standard. Now, that's a hell of a policy. Y'all are too young to think about this yet, but one point, my grandkids are going to look at me and say, now, what did you do to protect the environment for me? And I must say, well, we in Kentucky did the bare minimum that we were required to. That's a hell of a legacy, all right? any conversation benefits from having sound science, from having the conversation, from having the medical community, from having the scientific community, from having the community that understands and has the humility to understand what we don't know, right? And to interject that into the conversations. And so I would encourage you all, get involved, track what's going on, let your voice be heard. You know, it is, and just to leave you with the story, okay? You know, there was a recent article about me in the Courier Journal. Somebody said it read like an obituary. I said, hell, I hope not. But one of the things it talked about is that I have this pair of shoes that only get shined if a good bill gets passed. Well, in 2001, we passed a good bill, and that bill funded all of the litter prevention and all of the city dump closures and all of the, a lot of the work that's being done around the Commonwealth. When you might think to yourself, well, how did that bill get started? Well, let me tell you, a 15-year-old kid from Estill County went to the legislature and he talked to the Greg Stumbo, who was then the floor, he was the Speaker of the House. And he said, you know, we need a bottle bill. We need a bill to put a value on single-use containers and cans and bottles so that they will stop being littered and so they will be recycled. And he said this, he said, you know, Mr. Speaker, he said, I have driven a lot of back roads in Estill County. And if you've ever been to Estill County, you know there are a lot of back roads in Estill County. I used to live there. And he said, I've seen a lot of people throwing cans and bottles out of cars and trucks. He says, I've never seen anybody throwing nickels and dimes. And that simple idea that by placing a value on something, you would divert it from being waste and you would cause it to be recycled, caught the attention of the Speaker. And he said to his committees, no bill moves out of the House until this bill gets a hearing. Now understand that bottle bills have been filed for 30 years in Kentucky and more. And every time they get filed, we have all these national lobbyists that descend on Kentucky to talk about the end of the civilized world occurring if you have a bottle bill. But that issue got raised. And in 2001, the bill got through the process over to the Senate. It wasn't going to be passed out of the Senate. But instead of that bill, we ended up making appreciable reforms in the funding for solid waste management in Kentucky. And those shoes got shined. And it all goes back to a kid from an Estill County high school class who decided this was a project he wanted to take on. So don't ever think that your voice doesn't have value and doesn't make a difference. Okay? With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Trent, and I'm just going to encourage you all. I would love to see a lot of you getting involved in the process to whatever extent you can. Reach out to your legislators, offer to help. Okay, because one of the things I get a lot of calls from folks saying, or I get notes from saying, Fitz, what do you think about this? There's a bill, House Bill 361. That allows local communities to avoid fluoridating drinking water. What do you think about that? I said, you know, there are those who feel strongly about fluoridation, but it is the single most effective mechanism for public health that has been devised in terms of oral, dental care. Somebody will come and say, well, what do you think about whether we should take over the program that the Corps of Engineers currently manages that protects against filling and placing fill and dredge material into waters of the Commonwealth, wetlands and streams. I said, well, this should be based on science. A lot of times it's unfortunately based on politics. And whether we should take that over, the question should be, is it going to protect our streams better? But in some cases, it becomes, is it going to help the coal industry? Or is it going to help this industry or that industry? Having the voice of sound science, not picking sides, but letting the legislators know this is what's going to happen if you pass this bill. That's a voice that needs to be heard. So I would encourage you all, get involved with KAS. Get involved with groups that advocate on issues of concern to you. Find that passion and work through that passion to make change. And with that, I'm going to kick you back to you, Trent. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to hop off because I need to talk to legislators about trying to clean up the old Muhlenberg County landfill. But I could stay on for a couple of minutes, and Randy, I'm sure, can answer any questions, and Kara can answer questions that you have on the legislative process. But thank you all for being part of this conversation today, and thanks for having me.
We can't thank you enough. You, Randy, Kara, and Rob too. I'm glad we made a good choice with Rob being on board. We in KES, we do our own bill tracking, and at some point that will be public as well. So we need help. If anyone is interested in being on that committee, be sure and let us know. So let's just jump right into it. We have about 10 minutes left, and I know Fitz has to go, and I want to honor your all's time, but if anybody has any questions, why don't you raise your hand? And the way I would just ask that we do this is make it as succinct as possible. And if our panelists could make their answers as succinct as possible, that way we could get through maybe five or so questions and answers. I think that may be doable in 10 minutes. So does anyone have, and also Amanda, there's a poll at the end that we would like for you to participate in. Would you like to say something about that?
Rob, I think wants to.
Yeah, I'll mention it. I've got the poll prepared to go. So if we've got a few minutes at the end, I'll share a 4-question poll to get some feedback from people. Step 1 in getting feedback, we also want to do a survey that we'll email in between our 2 workshops.
Okay. I know Fitz has to go and some others have to go too. So does anybody have any questions? We'll just jump right in and try to start getting started on that. Questions or comments? You would just raise your hand, whether virtually or. I see Peyton has a question. Go ahead.
Hi, I also am very against the single-use plastics right now, and so I tried to email the governor. I'm from Virginia. I'm going to school in Murray State. If there's anything else I can do that can get it even looked at, because I know, Randy, you said they won't even take a look at that kind of bill. So what can I do to get that looked at or help put my voice out there for that?
I'm sure Kara could help answer this too, but so the sponsor of that bill is Representative Marzian, a Louisville Democrat, and since the plastic
Y'all, it's
bill,
not going anywhere.
yeah, and since the plastics bill is an environmental bill, typically that bill would have to go to the Natural Resources and Energy Committee to be heard before it could go to a full floor vote. The chair of that committee is a representative named Representative Gooch out of Western Kentucky, Republican.
He's an enemy of the environment.
And also, Representative Marzian and Representative Gooch do not get along. So the best thing you can do, though, is to email Representative Gooch, email House leadership. Representative Osborne is the current Speaker of the House, an Oldham County Republican, but a very reasonable one, in my opinion. Especially when it comes to these types of issues. So that's who else you should email: House leadership, the chair of the committee, and also do the same thing on the Senate side, because there's a Senate bill that does the same thing as well. In that case, Brandon Smith is the senator that's the chair of the Natural Resources and Energy Committee, and Senator Stivers, president of the Senate. Kind of, he's in
Hey,
charge of
Randy, I want to throw in a slightly hopeful workaround. Gooch,
Sure.
Chair Gooch is never going to hear that bill. I just can't imagine that's ever going to happen. But that doesn't mean that it can't still get to the floor and or move. You're just going to have to work around him, which means you have to get all of the leadership to want to move it through a different committee, which shouldn't happen, but can and does happen all the time. It's usually used as a process to kill bills. You put them into a committee where the people don't know anything about it, and it's never going to get heard because nobody's been lobbying that chair. But you can also use it to pass a bill. So in this scenario with that plastics bill, it's going to have to go around Gooch. So you're going to have to find another chair who you can figure out a way to wiggle it in there and condense leadership to push it to a different committee. Make the committee. So just
Oh, I'm
throw that
sorry,
out there.
Kara.
You're good.
I would just add, Peyton and anybody else who's interested, we get involved in these sorts of things as well. So if anyone here, hopefully everyone, but if anyone here is getting more interested in KAS, specifically our education and advocacy, which is really our policy committee this time of year, please get involved. And we are in the process right now of reviewing bills and writing policy briefs on things that we support, oppose, or just want to follow.
If I could make one comment, if an issue's not going anywhere in the legislature, you can also turn to the media to try to get it on the public's radar. There was an instance last session where there was a story in which a lawmaker was prominently quoted in saying, "I've never had a bill heard by committee." Within a week of that story coming out, she had a bill heard in committee.
The other thing I would say too is you don't just have to email, or, emails on the level of, advocacy with a bill. The best way to advocate for the bill is to meet with the legislator in person. Then try to give them a phone call, have a personal phone call with them, then maybe an email or a letter. And then probably the least, although it's still valuable, are kind of like the sign-on big group letters that you send to legislators every once in a while. But all of these legislators, especially if it's a legislator in your district, they want to hear from you and they want to talk to you, no matter what your political affiliation is. They really care about their constituents, and if they can help you, they will. There's lots of other factors that go into that, but all of you can contact your legislators directly and speak to them, or try to arrange a meeting with them in person or via Zoom or something.
Yeah, one thing to add that years ago, there was a citizen who showed up, came all the way up from far eastern Kentucky to talk to a Jefferson County legislator on an issue. And it was admittedly late in the session, but the legislator, to my great disappointment, when the constituent said, Representative so-and-so, could I talk to you for a minute? He said, "Are you from my district?" And the person said, "No." He says, "Well, I don't have time for you," and walked away. I was absolutely appalled, and I told that legislator that I was appalled. But the reality is he was more worried about what his own constituents thought. So in that situation, if you know somebody in the legislature, a sponsor of the bill that that you are concerned needs to hear from people, you've got probably friends in that person's district. So reach out to your friends and say, "Hey, would you, when we used to try to get Senator Dan Kelly, who was the Senate floor leader, concerned about a particular issue, we would call out our secret weapon, which is the Sisters of Loretto, who are the most kick-ass group of women in the entire world. And they would call the senator and kind of talk to him about their concerns. So you network with folks. And use those networks to try to amplify your voice and your concerns to get to the legislators, because most of them are much more open to, even when they get in crunch time, they're much more open to hearing from folks all around the Commonwealth than, unfortunately, that one legislator was.
Excellent advice. Eleanor, you had your hand up next, and I apologize for misspelling your name. I realized I just
Hey, if you are a constituent, though, put that in the subject line if you're sending an email. Don't beat around the bush around that.
I had a quick question in general regarding personal, in-person visits versus virtual. Is one better than the other at this point, or is it a matter of what you're more comfortable with COVID and with trying to get groups to Frankfurt?
Well, I can tell you a legislator refused to do a Zoom meeting with me last week. They said in person only for them during the session, which felt very petty, but it's legislator to legislator.
There are some will only do Zoom meetings. I'll just mention that.
Also that.
Yeah. Well, and in terms of testimony, it's committee by committee. Fortunately, I've testified twice. I've testified twice on bills this session, and in both cases, because I have some medically fragile people that I was concerned about, the chairman Gooch was absolutely fine with me doing Zoom. So you can contact the if you get on the LRC website and click committees, and then click the committee you're interested in, it'll tell you who the committee staff are. It'll have the materials for the committee. It'll have the agenda for the committee. They've done a lot to make it more remote friendly over the last year and a half, because we never had access to committee substitutes until they got passed out. You'd find them the next day. And when things get pretty fast and furious towards the end of the session, you have committee substitutes that completely gut and change a bill dramatically. But they're now available. And you can contact the committee chair and say, I'd love to put a letter in the folder of the committee members, or I would love to testify if that's possible. And a lot of times the committee chairs will allow you to do it by Zoom.
We can't thank you guys enough for being here. This has been wonderful. Thanks for doing it another year, and we look forward to the next session. Certainly, I would love to come back sometime and have just a storytelling day, because I know that everybody here, including Rob, has all kinds of stories. So maybe we can do that. At this point, I just wanted to thank you all for giving me the floor for a little while, and I'm going to turn it back over to Amanda and Rob for the closing statements, the poll, and anything else.
Rob, it's all you.
Okay. So just looking ahead to tell you a bit about the February 25th workshop, a state representative, Josie Raymond, will join us and speak. We've got some of our student collaborators who are going to discuss some of the important issues and ways that they've been advocates. We'll have Jacob Miller and Megan Zipperer from UofL and Eleanor Johnson from UK. So they will be speaking. At that time, we'll also sort of give updates on what's occurred between now and then in the General Assembly. And another thing I'd be interested in, and I'm going to send an email to everyone and ask about this, but if anyone has success stories or just stories about your encounters at trying to be an advocate or contact legislators, I'd like to know that. So as the final piece of business here, and I know our time is up, so I'm going to share a really brief survey. You can get it done in 2 minutes, and then you're free to go. If you're still here in 5 minutes, I'll share the results. And then I'll say goodbye again, but I'll say goodbye now for the people who don't stick around. You don't need to stick around because we are going to stay in touch, and I'll be sending an email. But thank you so much for everyone presented today, everyone who attended and listened today. It's exciting to have a group of sharp, well-intentioned people coming together to work together to give science a voice in public policy. So with that, I am sharing a poll, and if you're not here in a few minutes when results are shared, I say goodbye to you now.